Andrea Palladio. The Church of the Redeemer here in Venice is one of his finest achievements.
Palladio's church really captures all the ideas that Vitruvius was talking about in his books on architecture. These ideas of whole number of proportions being the things that we like when we see a building. And you can see it with Palladio here. The entrance is a kind of 1-to-2 relationship. The height of the entrance to the width is in that 1-to-2 relationship. The triangles, for example, the smaller triangle is about the third the size of the larger one. And for Vitruvius, these are all the proportions that you find in the human body. And this is what Leonardo was exploring in his diagram of Vitruvian Man. And I think the reason that we're drawn to them is they're somehow harmonic proportions.
Palladio's ability to turn Vitruvian theories into real buildings is his lasting legacy, according to Venice's chief architect, Renata Codello.
In the past, not all architects think about the relation about mathematical geometry invention. This element go separated in the world, but the human mind can use all together. So that drawing became the most height synthesis of this question. Palladio, Serlio, and so other architects use the tractates to put together theory and practice, and in this way created a language of architecture.
For Leonardo, this new language of harmonic proportions and ratios went beyond the body and architecture. Proportion, he wrote, is found not only in numbers and measurements, but also in sounds, in landscapes, in times and in places.
Leonardo's diagram really goes to the heart of his philosophy of putting man in a universal context, from going from the micro to the macro and back again. But I'm beginning to wonder whether Leonardo's solution is not so much geometrical, but actually has something much more to do with another of his obsessions, understanding human anatomy.
The premise is that the human body is God's most perfect bit of design. You know, it's a central thing that he designed in nature, and he designed it with geometry, but it's functional. Leonardo was the first person both to produce this eyewitness of the sheer reality of portraying the human body in this way, and getting geometrical and dynamic principles out of it, and it's astonishingly original.
Yes, yes.
I mean, if we look at the skull here, this is only a sequence of dated anatomical drawings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's clearly a real skull, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And he shows how all these nerves, all the sensory nerves, pour into a single point at the geometrical centre, which he calls the sensus communis, the senso commune, or common sense, which is where our term comes from.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing, yeah.
The anatomical perfection of Vitruvian Man is no surprise. Leonardo was the first artist ever to carry out a full human autopsy, making his knowledge of the workings of the body far superior to any of his contemporaries.
He tries to get this great understanding of the human body as a total system mirroring the system of the worlds. This is all an expression of internal activity, the dynamism within the human body, the brain, the system of motion in the muscles, and so on. Whether it's the operation of the biceps or a heart valve, for instance. Every small bit of the human body ought to work geometrically. So it's philosophically immensely ambitious. They're philosophical anatomies and not medical anatomies.
with the help of a volunteer Vitruvian man and an osteopath, I want to see whether the anatomy in Leonardo's drawing is just philosophical, manipulated to fit the geometry, or whether his strict proportions really work in practice.
First thing, of course, is that Vitruvian Man is meant to fit exactly inside a square. So that means the height
right.
is the same as the arm span. So
It should be, yes.
Yeah. So should we see whether shape?
Why not?
Okay.
The idea of human height being the same as the width across outstretched arms, as in the diagram, seems counterintuitive. But in our experiment, it's almost exactly the same.
193.
Right, so 193.
So it's not bad,
That's
it's
pretty
2
good.
centimetres off.
Yeah, yeah. So an important measurement is the cubit, which is the elbow to the point here, which is sort of the height is meant to be 4 cubits. So
The cubit is the basic unit that the whole system of Vitruvian proportion relies on. 4 equal cubits make up the height of the man. 1 cubit is the width across the shoulders. And again, we found that all those measurements were almost exactly the same.
When you look at proportions in a setting where you don't expect them to be right, because they look different, the arm length and the height shouldn't work to the naked eye. But when you put them together and the realization that there is height and length, well, there's a magic sense about what Leonardo was trying to do, and some sort of realization that he was right.
We don't know if there was ever a real model for Vitruvian Man. We do know that Leonardo was a compulsive people watcher. At the public baths, in city squares, in suburbs and slums, he sought his subjects. He even spent a whole year finding the right face for Judas for his Last Supper. Out of his people watching comes the diagram's final layer, one that isn't in Vitruvius at all, but is pure Leonardo. Movement. Captured in the diagram by the man's distinctive double pose. Exploring the theme of movement, Martin Kemp and graphic designer Steve Marr collaborated on this remarkable animation for a recent V&A exhibition.
The idea was based upon looking at Leonardo's drawings, and you see lots of drawings by Leonardo in which you have sequences of movement, or even single drawings, and you've got the feeling that he wants them to move. It's a very compelling feeling when you're looking at Leonardo drawings, so I thought it'd be terrific to work with a major animator and to scratch an itch which Leonardo couldn't scratch, because he didn't have the techniques to do so.
The motion is there. I mean, Leonardo is a proto-animator. The attempt to capture movement was there. It was really just bringing together in some cases, sequences of drawings to make them move, to make them run together and actually work as animation. In other cases, it was to kind of bring out the animation that you know is within the original drawing, as with the Vitruvian Man. He was analysing movement, which is what animators do all the time in their everyday life. The way they watch the way people walk down the street, the way they answer the phone. You know, you have to be analysing movement to understand it, to be able to reproduce it, and that's what Leonardo was doing.
You know that he can do these spatial movements in his head. You know, he's like some of the great scientists, or Kepler and so on. He can envisage things turning, he can do all this and slicing off geometric bodies. He has an amazing plastic imagination, and these have a kind of mental reality inside the brain.
The 3D potential of Vitruvian Man is realised on a large scale in this contemporary sculpture in London's Belgrave Square.
This sculpture is a really good example of just how iconic Leonardo's diagram has become. It's a really striking sculpture I'm not really sure, though, that it works in 3 dimensions. It looks a little bit like 2 men rather than the one man in motion that you see in Leonardo's diagram. But what's so amazing is the idea of turning a 500-year-old diagram into a monumental piece of public art. I can't really think of any other diagram that has had the same sort of treatment. And it's a real mark of the power of this diagram to be instantly recognisable and to transmit a message about man and his place in the cosmos that even today we find so appealing.
At the Times newspaper, political cartoonist Peter Brooks makes regular use of this legacy of instant recognisability and visual appeal.
Cartoonists often use well-known paintings as hooks for satire. In other words, they parody a well-known image. And if you want a well-known image, this is probably just about one of the best known. Well, first of all, it's simple in the sense that you can see exactly what it's about. And it's kind of intriguing as well. It's a metaphor for the ideal. The human body was analogous with the universe, and therefore, for me, it's the political universe. And inevitably, I use it to show that political people don't measure up, that they don't achieve the ideal that the actual drawing is about. That's the point. This is a drawing of Silvio Berlusconi, which I did a couple of years ago when he was re-elected. And he needed the support of Italy's Northern League, who are a far-right organisation. So there he is with a fascist salute with one arm. Given that the other appealing thing about it is that it depicts a man with no clothes on, there's nothing more appealing to a cartoonist than to be able to strip politicians down to their bare essentials, so to speak.
Leonardo's extraordinary diagram has joined the pantheon of an elite group of world artworks that have become truly iconic. Its philosophy of placing man in a universal context still speaks to us now, over half a millennium after its creation.
Although the diagram doesn't represent some huge scientific breakthrough which will have great consequences for the future of humanity, its strength is that it captures an idea that mathematics underpins both nature and the man-made world. It represents a synthesis of architecture, anatomy, and geometry. But it's the perfection and elegance of Leonardo's solution to this riddle of the square and the circle in Vitruvius, which gives the diagram its power and its beauty.
There's double comedy coming up next this evening here on BBC HD. Him and Her is at 11, after Reggie Perrin next.